Good afternoon. I'm Jim Wright with the Longhorn Historical Society, and I'm here on location at the Nolan Plantation, just outside of Bostwick, Georgia. Here, this plantation has been around for well over 100 years, and today we're going to talk about this location during the time of before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. We're going to talk about slavery and sharecropping, and you're going to see artifacts from those bygone eras. So sit back and enjoy this tale as we go Georgia on location at the Nolan Plantation. Here we go. After the Civil War, Georgia was in terrible condition. From northwest Georgia to Savannah, the state was scarred from Sherman's devastation on the land. Warehouses, factories, railroads, and farms were burned or ruined. The former Confederates had no money because the Confederate money they had printed was now worthless. To add on to this, there was a serious labor problem that would lead Georgia and the South into a new type of labor: sharecropping and tenant farming. On paper, it seemed like a great solution to a fundamental problem in the South. You had landowners who needed a labor force but couldn't pay them back because of the lack of currency, and you had a labor force who was unable to find work that paid them an adequate wage. With sharecropping and tenant farming, cash-poor landowners provided land and other resources to the laborer in return for the laborer's work on the farm. Let's look at this flow chart. As you can see, this is called the sharecropper cycle of poverty. We start out at the sharecropper has provided land and seed. In exchange, he promises the landowner half the crop. Sharecropper buys food and clothing on credit from the landowner's store, also called the commissary. The sharecropper plants and harvests the crop. The sharecropper gives the landowner a crop to sell. The sharecropper will get half the earnings. When they settle up at the end of the season, the landowner says the sharecropper owes more than he has earned. To pay the debt, the sharecropper must promise the landowner a greater share of next year's crop. And you can see in the middle, by the time the sharecropper had their share of crops and paid their debt, they rarely had any money left. Often they were uneducated and could not argue with the landowners. And this cycle of poverty would continue year after year after year after year, which made it very, very, very difficult for the sharecropper and the tenant farmer to get out of it. Landowners soon found ways to keep their employees indebted to the land and never having the opportunity to purchase their own land. This system applied to both poor blacks and whites. This would also make it difficult for them to play roles in cultural, economic, and political areas of the South. A couple of similarities between a sharecropper and a tenant farmer was both were poor whites and blacks who were usually illiterate. Both agreed to exchange their labor for crop production in return for the land worked, and both had to buy from the landowner's store, called the commissary, on credit, which would put them in more debt and less likely to get out of this system. The major difference is that a sharecropper owned nothing but their labor, but a tenant farmer owned some tools, animals, and other equipment. If you're looking at this as if it were a ladder, the sharecropper is at the very bottom, and then the next rung up is the tenant farmer. This system would last well over 100 years, from the 1870s to 1997, where according to the New Georgia Encyclopedia, there were still 2,607 tenant farmers in 1997. However, this system would die out by World War II because there were boll weevil infestations, droughts, new technology that reduced the needed workers, and migration to the cities. During the time of Reconstruction, Georgians still planted enormous amounts of cotton, as well as corn and wheat. Cities like Atlanta, Columbus, and Savannah would grow after the Civil War. Atlanta would still be related to railroads. Columbus would have a thriving textile industry, and Savannah would resume shipping cotton throughout the world. Economics of Georgia would still be agriculturally dominant and one crop dominant, i.e. cotton, but there would be pockets of industry growing. Sharecropping and tenant farming would dominate this period. The Nolan plantation started in the 1850s when Thomas Nolan started buying up large acreage of land in Morgan County. This land was used from about 1856 to 1970, or the 1970s, and saw the end of slavery, the rise and fall of sharecropping, and has become uninhabited for the last 35 years. The house that you see was built by Thomas Nolan's grandson, James Alonzo Nolan, in 1905, and is an excellent example of neoclassical architecture of the time. The Nolan Mansion and the surrounding grounds would have occupied the crossroads where Georgia Highway 83 and Nolan Store Road intersect. On the property you would have had the mansion, cotton fields, a cotton gin, a blacksmith shop, a commissary, which would have sold items to the sharecroppers on credit, and some tenant farmers' homes. Remember, this is how the sharecropper would be tied to the land. Many sharecroppers were freed slaves, but lacked the education and money to leave and would become indebted to the landowner because they could never pay back the credit loan. The Nolan Mansion would stay in the Nolan family for a great many years, but by the 1970s it would be abandoned and would remain vacant ever since. There has been efforts to restore it. One such effort occurred in 2005 when it was used to film scenes for a TV show. In 2015, the house was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So if you're in the Boswick area, stop by and take some pictures of the mansion, the store, and other ancient buildings that show the history of Morgan County. This is Jim Wright with Georgia on Location. Have a great day.